Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty is on the case. We've been talking about the two lawsuits against Wisconsin's congressional maps that are moving forward, with the liberal state Supreme Court recently forming two 3-person committees to look at them and form opinions on them, I guess. Redraw new maps. I'm not clear what these 3-judge panels are really supposed to do. But luckily we have the founder and the president of WILL, Rick Esenberg, joining me to talk about this, because yesterday WILL announced they filed motions to intervene on both lawsuits. Good morning, Rick Esenberg. How are you?
Good morning, Jay. How are you?
I'm doing really well. We know that this is a liberal Supreme Court. We know that at least two of these most recently elected members actually ran on overturning these maps. And yet those justices aren't just doing a quickie redraw of the maps themselves. So what's the point of these panels? Or is it to add legitimacy to something, or what's your guess?
There is a provision in state statutes that when somebody challenges district maps, that a court is supposed to appoint a 3-judge panel to hear the case. That would then, the decision would then be taken up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court for review.
So they'll actually hear the case.
Yeah,
okay.
They'll sit as the trial judges, and it's not unlike what they do on the federal side if you challenge maps in federal court. The controversy that has arisen, and Justice Hagedorn raised it in his opinion, concurring in part and dissenting in part. He said, they really ought to have been picked randomly. Instead, they were handpicked by the majority using criteria that were never specified. And, if you look at them, they're all judges who have connections to the Democratic Party.
Sure.
And so, this is, I think, caused a lot of people to question. Frankly, I don't think there's any way around this, the fairness of the process.
Well, I mean, sure. The 6 members of those 3-judge panels are all well-known former liberals, former liberal judges, and I don't think there's any question that this is a partisan endeavor. But your team suggested yesterday that the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty was going to challenge this effort on a couple of different fronts. So let's start with the argument that the panels themselves are not the way to go here. I don't want to say they're unconstitutional, but you're going to question the use of the panels.
An alternative would be to take it by original action. That's happened in the past. I mean, we filed an original action on redistricting after the 2020 census. After the composition of the court changed, there was a new lawsuit filed by essentially the same people that are involved in this one, challenging legislative state maps. The court then redid those maps in a way that is quite problematic. And this is really the third time around. Jay, I feel a little bit like Michael Corleone in Godfather 3. I mean, this is the third time around now for redistricting, and every time I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Exactly. Will has done something like 5 or 6 different actions regarding just these recent maps. But the other avenue of or argument of appeal would be we're rushing a process forward, basically. If you would, further explain the argument that these new lawsuits are, quote, time barred.
Well, I mean, they're barred by a doctrine called latches because essentially we're litigating something that people have tried to, that sort of affiliated or like-minded people have tried to litigate twice before. There was a challenge to these congressional, not a challenge, but these congressional maps were litigated immediately following the 2020 census. They were challenged again after the composition of the court changed. That challenge was rejected, and now we're back for a third time. And in addition, you have to keep in mind that these maps, these congressional district maps, because those are the ones that are involved here, it's not the state legislature, they were the maps that were proposed in the initial case following the 2020 census by Tony Evers.
Yeah.
Right? They were his maps. The Republicans actually opposed these maps. They thought that they were distorted in certain ways to disadvantage Brian Style in the first district. And so we can get into a whole argument about, whether that's a fair characterization or not. But the point of the matter is that this is very extraordinary to keep going back and doing this again and again and again.
Yep.
Based on changes in the composition of the court. It's not something that is normal judicial practice.
Right. We're talking with Rick Esenberg, of course. This was a listener question. I had it too. If our state court basically rigs the maps in the Democrats' favor, can conservatives leap to the other branch of the courts? The answer seems to be, if we have a good argument on how their move violated federal law or constitution, right?
Well, right, but you have to have what's called a federal question. That is, if
right.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court is the final arbiter in the interpretation of state law, and so if you want to, if you're not happy with what happened in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, you have to be able to make an argument that federal law is being violated by what they did. Now, this happened in the first redistricting case that we brought after the 2020 census, a case called Johnson. The court had adopted the state legislative maps that were proposed by Governor Evers based upon an assertion that the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act, required it. We took that case up to the United States Supreme Court, and they did what lawyers call it. They GVR'd it. They basically accepted the case and decided that sort of summarily that the Wisconsin Supreme Court had got it wrong, sent it back for them to do again, and they adopted at that point the maps that were proposed by the Republican legislature. You have to find an issue like this again. Now, the plaintiffs have, understanding this, have characterized their arguments in these cases as including only state law. The problem is that they're congressional districts.
Right.
And while state law determines how they're going to be apportioned, the United States Supreme Court has also made clear that they're reserving the right to review these cases if there's been a departure from, sort of the normal precepts of judicial review. And I think we'll see that we may see what the United States Supreme Court meant by that in this very case.
Yeah, but elections are both federal and state, and there are federal and state interests and federal and state laws. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I don't know if I don't know the answer to this, obvious, but I've always wondered, so I wanted to ask you this as well. Is there any avenue of appeal based on the law that says these maps are redrawn after a census that's taken at the start of the decade, unless there's a specific reason to redraw the electoral maps? Aren't both sides of the political aisle basically way off the reservation on this? Well,
redistricting can sometimes happen in the course of a 10-year cycle. Normally what we do is we use the 2020 census in part because in order to get to the very precise calibration that's required in congressional districts, and where they essentially have to have the same population,
right.
And they typically will vary maybe by one voter, maybe a couple of voters in some cases. You can't do that in 2027 based on the 2020 census, because you probably couldn't even do it in 2021 because those census numbers are constantly changing. And the courts have said that redistricting every 10 years is good enough. But the problem is that while there are interim measures of population, they aren't as precise as what we get in a decennial census. And so, to some extent, particularly in a case like these two, in which they're weak in the sense that under traditional principles, there's really no way to argue that these congressional districts are gerrymandered. Right. They don't look strange. They're not particularly anomalous. And although there are 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats, it's not as if the current Republican incumbents couldn't lose in their districts. I mean, Derek Van Orden could lose. I just read something last night talking about how Derek Van Orden is in trouble after we look at the results in Tennessee. Now, I don't know whether he'll win or whether he'll lose, but the fact that somebody can suggest that he's in trouble and that he could lose the race also suggests that the district is not so gerrymandered as to be uncompetitive. It's hard to imagine Brian Stile losing in the first district, but that's because he's Brian Stile. He's a very good politician. I think that, if were he to announce that he wasn't running for re-election, I think that, the Democrats would invest in that race. I think that they think that they had a chance to win it because they do have a chance to win it if they run the right candidate.
Right. So if they're not too heavily gerrymandered, and as you said, the Wisconsin Supreme Court adopted Evers' new congressional maps just in 2022, the ostensibly on the excuse that, well, this is just readjusting the population figures. There's really no reason to touch these maps.
Yeah, the other thing you have to keep in mind is that both of these cases in slightly different ways say, look, you have to draw these congressional districts so that the composition of the congressional delegation matches the partisan outcome in statewide elections, like elections for president, governor, and senator. But the problem is, and I used to teach election law at Marquette Law School, and when you got to redistricting, this is one of the first things you did. You said that, look, the outcome of geographic district races won't necessarily match the statewide partisan balance. Right. If, in fact, the voters who vote for Democrats and the voters who vote for Republicans they vary in their geographic concentration, and we know that they do. Yep. So in a sense, the decision that we made to elect these congressmen by single-member geographic districts means that we're not trying to match the statewide composition. What we're trying to do is draw, contiguous and compact districts that are on a geographic basis, and so that people who live in roughly the same area can be represented based not on their partisan affiliation, but on where they live.
Right. We're talking with Rick Esenberg. The final question I have for you is, the more liberal court did, in fairness, reject two earlier attempts by leftists to lobby them to get involved in these maps. One of them was just a few months ago. So does that give you any solace or suggestion that these justices are going to try to be fair and this isn't all political?
I hope so. And I don't want to prejudge things. I don't want to say that even the members of the panel or, the majority of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, won't see the light and do the right thing. I understand that there's a lot of concern about that right now, but one of the reasons that we intervened is, we're going to go in there and we're going to make the right arguments. We don't believe that legislatures should, draw a gerrymander in effect for competitiveness or gerrymander to meet a statewide standard that really is inapplicable to geographic districts. We'll make those arguments and, hopefully, the courts will be swayed by them.
Let's hope so. The great Rick Esenberg, whose Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty is an organization that we conservatives in Wisconsin could not do without. Do you happen to know how long you've been around? You founded this. Do you know what year it was?
Well, yeah, and Jay, I'm getting older, but I'm not so old that I can't remember when I when I founded Will. It was in 2011.
Okay. And you were still teaching at Marquette at that time?
Yeah, I went from full-time status to adjunct status in 2011. So I taught there part-time for a little while longer. That was the job I had before I
well, and it's just great to see how it's ballooned and it's sort of got a think tank, feature of it now. And just Will is an incredibly important, I think, feature for Wisconsin and Wisconsin conservatism, but really, a smaller market, freer government. And I just appreciate what you've done.
Thank you for those kind remarks. My colleagues are the best.
Thanks so much. Take care. Rick Esenberg from Will joining us this morning. It's 8:45 on WISN.